Lena shook her head. Just take care of him. Michael nodded. Always. As the police escorted him to their vehicle, Lena let out a slow breath, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried her through the morning was wearing off, leaving her drained. She turned to Barry, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Well," Barry said, exhaling sharply. "That was one hell of a morning." Lena let out a small, breathy laugh. "Yeah. No kidding." Barry crossed his arms, glancing toward the empty parking lot where the kidnapper's car had once been. "You know, I've worked here a long time, and I've seen a lot of messed up stuff. But this," he shook his head. "This was different." Lena nodded, rubbing her hands over her arms as if trying to shake off the lingering tension. "Yeah. It was." Barry eyed her carefully. "You all right?" Lena thought about it for a moment. Was she? She had spent years ignoring the things that happened at the Starlight Motel, convincing herself that it wasn't her place to get involved. But today, she had crossed a line she never thought she would. She had seen a child in danger, and instead of looking away, she had done something. And because of that, Noah was safe. A strange sense of peace settled over her. "I think so," she finally said. Barry studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You know, Lena, you're a tough one." Lena smiled faintly. "Guess I am." She turned toward the motel, her gaze drifting toward room 12. The door was still open, the room empty now. The paramedics had taken Krista Holloway to the hospital, but she would face charges once she recovered. The image of Noah's fearful face flashed in Lena's mind, and she felt a flicker of anger toward the woman who had failed him so terribly. Barry followed her gaze. "Think she'll do time for this?" Lena exhaled. "I hope so." Barry sighed, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Well, I guess I should actually start my shift now." "You want me to cover for you?" "You've had a hell of a morning." Lena hesitated, then shook her head. "No. I think I need to keep moving. I need to do something normal." Barry smirked. "Normal? At the Starlight? Good luck with that." Lena chuckled, the tension in her chest easing just a little. She grabbed her cleaning cart and pushed it toward the next room on her list. The world hadn't changed overnight. The Starlight was still the same rundown motel it had always been, a place where people came and went, carrying their secrets. But something inside Lena had changed. For the first time in years, she felt like she had made a difference. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Lena moved through the motions of her work, her hands scrubbing, straightening, and tidying without much thought. The Starlight Motel was still the same place it had always been, with its stained carpets, flickering lights, and faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. But for her, something felt different. She kept thinking about Noah, his small, scared voice, the way he had clung to her, the desperate plea in his eyes. He had been trapped in something no child should ever have to experience, used as a bargaining chip by the one person who was supposed to love and protect him. And she had almost let it happen. If she had listened to Barry, if she had ignored her instincts, if she had let fear of getting involved keep her silent, Noah would be gone. She shuddered at the thought. As she finished cleaning a vacant room, she stepped outside and leaned against the doorframe, letting the warm afternoon air wash over her. The adrenaline was completely gone now, leaving exhaustion in its place. She hadn't realized how much she was shaking until she wrapped her arms around herself. Barry walked past, pausing when he saw her. "You good?" Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure it was the truth. Barry leaned against the railing beside her. "You know, you're not the same person who walked into work this morning." Lena huffed a small, humorless laugh. "Feels like I lived a lifetime in a few hours." Barry rubbed his chin. So, what now? You gonna start reporting every shady guest that checks in? Lena considered that. Could she go back to the way things were? Pretending not to see? Looking the other way? No, she said after a long pause. But I won't ignore something like that ever again. Barry nodded slowly. Fair enough. He glanced out toward the playground, the old swing swaying slightly in the breeze. You think the kid's gonna be okay? Lena thought about Noah in his father's arms, the way Michael had held onto him like he was afraid to let go. There was no doubt in her mind that the man loved his son. I think so, she said. He's got someone who cares about him. That's more than some kids have. Barry was quiet for a moment. Then he let out a sigh and pushed off the railing. Well, guess we better get back to keeping this place from falling apart. Lena smirked. Good luck with that. Barry chuckled as he walked away, and Lena let out a breath, feeling lighter than she had all day. She wasn't naive. The world was still a mess. The Starlight Motel would still be a place where people hid, ran, and lost themselves. But today, she had done something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Lena pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, the wheels squeaking over the worn-out linoleum. The rhythm of her routine helped calm her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Noah. His small face, pale and frightened, was burned into her memory. No matter how much she tried to focus on her tasks, she couldn't shake the feeling that today had changed everything. She entered another vacant room, methodically stripping the bed and replacing the sheets. The scent of cheap disinfectant filled the air as she wiped down the surfaces, her mind still spinning. She had always known the Starlight Motel wasn't the safest place, but today had been a wake-up call. She thought of Krista Holloway, Noah's mother, lying in that bed, too drugged to realize what she had done. The idea that a mother could sell her own child made Lena's stomach turn. She had seen addicts before, had even cleaned up after them, but this was something different. This was cruelty. She tried to remind herself that it wasn't her responsibility. Noah was safe now. The police had taken Krista, and the kidnapper was in custody. It was over. But it didn't feel over. Lena finished the room and moved to the next, her hands working mechanically. She scrubbed the bathroom, wiped down the nightstand, and replaced the towels, but her thoughts kept circling back to Noah. What if there were more kids like him? How many times had she seen something suspicious and ignored it, convincing herself that it wasn't her business? She leaned against the sink, staring at her reflection in the water-stained mirror. Would she have been able to live with herself if she had let Noah disappear? The thought made her stomach clench. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Barry leaned against the frame, arms crossed. You planning on cleaning every room twice? Lena exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Just thinking. Barry walked in, grabbing a clean towel from the stack and tossing it onto the bed. About the kid? Lena nodded. Barry sighed. Look, I get it. It's messed up. But the cops handled it. He's safe now. Lena turned to him. That's not the point, Barry. What if this wasn't the first time something like this happened here? What if there are other kids who don't get lucky? Barry ran a hand through his hair. Lena, you can't save the world. She narrowed her eyes. Maybe not. But I can pay attention. Barry studied her for a long moment before letting out a low whistle. Well, I guess I'll be seeing a lot more cops around here, then. Lena smirked. Maybe. Barry shook his head but didn't argue. Just don't get yourself in trouble, all right? You know the kind of people who come through here. Lena knew. She had spent years keeping her head down, avoiding trouble, and pretending not to notice things. But today had changed her. She wasn't sure she could go back to the way things were. She picked up her cleaning supplies and moved to the next room, pushing aside the weight in her chest. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine, changing linens, scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans filled with cigarette butts and crumpled fast food wrappers. She worked methodically, letting her body take over while her mind wandered. At some point, Barry called her to the front desk. "Got something for you," he said, holding up a small piece of paper. Lena frowned, taking it from him. Her breath caught when she saw the handwriting. "Thank you, Lena." It wasn't much. Just 2 words, written in a child's uneven scrawl. But it was enough. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into her pocket. Barry leaned on the counter, watching her. "Guess that kid really liked you." Lena smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah. I liked him too." Barry shook his head with a chuckle. "You're getting soft." Lena laughed. Maybe she was. But for the first time in years, she didn't mind. Lena stepped out of the motel office, the evening air cooler now, a welcome contrast to the heat of the day. The neon sign of the Starlight flickered weakly above her, casting a dim glow over the cracked pavement of the parking lot. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing over the small note Noah had left her. "Thank you, Lena." 2 simple words. But they carried a weight she couldn't explain. She had spent years here, cleaning up after strangers, keeping her head down, pretending not to see the darker things that happened in the shadows of the Starlight Motel. It was easier that way. Safer. But now, she wasn't sure she could go back to that. Barry had told her she couldn't save the world. Maybe he was right. But today, she had saved one little boy. And maybe that was enough. She let out a slow breath and leaned against the wall, staring out at the empty lot. She could still see it all in her mind, the way Noah had clung to her, the way his mother had barely reacted when he was taken, the way the man had sneered at her like she was nothing but an inconvenience. She had always known the world was cruel. But this? This had been a new kind of ugly. The sound of a car pulling into the lot drew her attention. She stiffened for a second, old instincts kicking in. But when she saw the familiar face behind the wheel, she relaxed. Michael Holloway stepped out of the car, looking tired but relieved. He spotted her immediately and walked over. "Hey," he said, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. Lena straightened. "Hey. How's Noah?" Michael smiled, the kind of smile that was worn around the edges but real. "Sleeping." He finally passed out in the car on the way home. Took a long bath, ate a grilled cheese sandwich, said it was the best one he ever had. "I think that was because of you." Lena chuckled softly. "Kid had a rough day." Michael nodded, his expression turning serious. "I wanted to come back and say thank you." "Really?" "If you hadn't stepped in," he exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't even want to think about where he'd be right now." Lena shifted, glancing down at the ground. "You don't have to thank me." "Yeah, I do," Michael said firmly. "I spent 2 days not knowing if I'd ever see my son again. And then there you were, standing in the way, not letting that bastard take him. That means everything." Lena swallowed hard, nodding. Michael hesitated before speaking again. "They told me at the station that Krista, she confessed." Lena's stomach turned. She admitted to selling him? Michael clenched his jaw. "Yeah. $2,000. That's what she thought he was worth." Lena let out a slow, shaky breath. "I'm so sorry." Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking away. "I knew she was using again. I knew she was bad news. But I never thought she would." He cut himself off, shaking his head. "Anyway. The cop said with the confession, plus her record, she's going away for a long time. I filed for full custody today. Shouldn't be a problem, given everything. Lena nodded. Good. He needs to be with you. Michael looked back at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. People like you, you're rare. Lena smirked. I'm just a motel maid. Michael smiled. No, you're not. For a moment, they just stood there in the quiet of the parking lot. Then Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Noah wanted me to give you this. Lena took it, carefully unfolding the page. It was a crayon drawing, messy, colorful, perfect. A stick figure of a woman with dark hair, standing beside a smaller stick figure with curly hair. Above them, a giant sun, a tree, and what looked like a playground. And at the bottom, in shaky, uneven letters, Lena and Noah. Lena pressed her lips together, something thick forming in her throat. Tell him I love it. Michael smiled. I will. She folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into her pocket next to the note. Michael took a step back, glancing at the road. I should get going. Noah will freak out if he wakes up and I'm not there. Lena nodded. Take care of him. Michael held her gaze. I will. He turned, walking back to his car. But before he got in, he paused. You ever think about leaving this place? Lena blinked. The motel? Michael shrugged. The Starlight. Orange Mound. Just starting over somewhere else. Lena hesitated. She had never really let herself think about that. This place, as awful as it was, had been her whole world for years. I don't know, she admitted. Michael nodded, as if he understood. Well, if you ever do, look me up. Lena felt something stir in her chest, something new, something she wasn't quite ready to name. She just smiled. Maybe I will. Michael gave her one last nod, then got into his car. Lena watched as he pulled out of the lot, the taillights disappearing into the night. She stood there for a long time after he was gone, the drawing still warm in her pocket. The Starlight Motel wasn't a place for happy endings. It was a place where people lost themselves, where secrets stayed buried, where bad things happened in the dark. But today, just once, something good had happened. She had saved a boy. And maybe, just maybe, she had saved herself too. Lena took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Then she turned and walked back inside. Noah, came the quiet reply. And how old are you, Noah? Noah held up 5 fingers, his eyes meeting Lena's briefly before darting away. Lena hesitated before asking her next question, not wanting to push too hard. Noah, can you tell me why you didn't want to go into the room? The boy's shoulders tensed, and Lena quickly added, It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. You don't have to explain anything to me. After a long moment, Noah whispered, It smells bad in there. I don't like it. Lena's mind flashed back to the sharp chemical odor she'd noticed earlier and to the paraphernalia she'd found on the bed. Her heart broke for this little boy, trapped in a situation he couldn't possibly understand. I'm sorry it smells bad, she said gently. But don't worry. It seems like you and your mom are just staying for one night. Maybe tomorrow you'll go somewhere nicer. Noah nodded, pushing himself slightly on the swing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked, Do you have any food? I'm really hungry. The question caught Lena off guard. It was still early morning, and the thought of this child going hungry twisted something inside her. Of course, she said, making a quick decision. Wait here just a moment. I'll get you something from the canteen. She pointed out the small food service area just a stone's throw from the playground. I'll be right back, okay? You can see me the whole time. As Lena hurried to the food service counter, she kept glancing back at Noah, who sat quietly on the swing, his feet barely touching the ground. At the counter, she ordered a grilled cheese sandwich, the most substantial item on the meager breakfast menu. While the canteen lady was registering the order, Lena saw Noah's mother emerge from the room and approach the playground. Torn between her promise to Noah and her instinct to avoid conflict, Lena hesitated. The canteen worker noticed her looking at the boy and the mother. Her voice snapped Lena back to attention. You still want to put your order? Lena considered, then nodded, deciding she could bring it to their room later if needed. By the time she returned to the playground, Noah's mother was trying to coax him back to the room. I'm sorry, Lena said, approaching cautiously. I didn't mean to leave him alone. He said he was hungry, so I ordered something from the kitchen. The mother's response was curt and dismissive. No need for that. Turning to Noah, she said firmly, let's go back to the room. Playtime's over. Noah's shoulders slumped as he slid off the swing. Lena's heart ached at the defeated look on his face. I can bring the sandwich to your room when it's ready, she offered. Don't bother us, the mother snapped. We don't need anything. Lena persisted gently. I could just leave it outside your door. No disturbance. The woman grunted noncommittally as she led Noah away. Lena watched them disappear into room 12, a sense of unease settling over her. With a sigh, she turned her attention back to her duties. The other rooms needed to be closed up after airing out. As she moved from door to door, closing windows and locking up, her mind kept drifting back to Noah and the troubling situation in room 12. When she finished her rounds, Lena retrieved the sandwich from the canteen and made her way to room 12. As she neared the door, muffled voices reached her ears. Noah's high-pitched whine mixed with the hushed tones of the adults. They were whispering about money. Not enough. I need more. That's it, then. As if trying to persuade the boy of something. Lena hesitated outside the door, her hand poised to knock. The memory of the utensil she'd found earlier warred with Barry's pragmatic advice. How many times had she turned a blind eye to similar situations, telling herself it wasn't her place to interfere? But the presence of a child changed everything. Still, she knew that if she started calling the police for every suspicious occurrence, she'd likely lose her job. The Starlight's owner wouldn't appreciate her scaring away paying customers, no matter how unsavory they might be. With a heavy heart, Lena knocked softly on the door. The voices inside fell silent. I've left the sandwich out here on the table, she called, trying to keep her voice neutral. After leaving the sandwich outside room 12 and notifying its occupants, Lena turned away with a heavy heart. She knew she needed to resume her cleaning duties, so she headed toward the janitor's closet to prepare her cleaning cart. As she stood outside the closet, organizing her supplies, Lena couldn't help but keep glancing back at room 12. She wondered if they would take the sandwich she'd left, hoping that at least Noah would get something to eat. Suddenly, the door to room 12 swung open. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she saw the man emerge, his hand firmly gripping Noah's arm. The mother was nowhere in sight. To Lena's dismay, they completely ignored the sandwich on the table, instead heading straight for the exit. Lena's heart began to race. She abandoned her cleaning cart and began to follow them, trying to maintain a discreet distance and appear casual as she watched the scene unfold. From her vantage point, she could clearly see what was happening. Noah was resisting. His small body twisted as he tried to break free from the man's iron grip. Lena's heart pounded. She knew she had to act. And she had to act now. Lena's feet moved before her mind fully caught up with what she was about to do. Her heart pounded as she hurried across the parking lot, trying to keep her voice steady. Excuse me, she called out, forcing an air of calm. Is everything all right? The man stiffened, his grip on Noah tightening. The boy whimpered, his little legs struggling to keep up with the man's long strides. We're fine, the man muttered without turning around. Lena wasn't convinced. Sir, are you checking out? If so, I can process that for you. The man finally turned, his eyes dark and filled with something that made Lena's stomach churn. "No," he said, voice clipped. "Mind your business." Noah's eyes locked onto Lena's, silently pleading. She swallowed hard. "I just want to make sure the little guy is okay." The man's jaw tensed. "He's my kid." Before Lena could say anything else, the man yanked open the car door and shoved Noah inside. The boy let out a small cry as he hit the seat. That was all Lena needed. "Noah," she said, taking a step forward. The boy scrambled toward the open door, his tiny hands reaching for her. "Help me," he cried. Lena lunged. But the man was faster. With a rough shove, he slammed the door shut, locking Noah inside. "Leave it alone, lady," the man snapped, his hand moving to his pocket. Lena's breath hitched. Was he reaching for a weapon? She took a step back but didn't back down. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The man cursed under his breath, his eyes darting toward the road. He was making a decision. Run or fight. Lena's hands shook as she reached for her phone. "Noah, stay in the car," she called. "I'm getting help." Noah pounded on the window, his little face contorted in fear. "I don't want to go." The man made his choice. Without warning, he shoved Lena aside and bolted for the driver's seat. Lena stumbled, her hands scraping against the pavement. "No," she screamed, scrambling to her feet. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched. The car lurched forward. Lena sprinted after it, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Somebody stop him," she cried. From the motel office, Barry burst out, his face pale with alarm. "What the hell?" "It's Noah!" Lena gasped. "He's taking him." Barry didn't hesitate. He ran toward the road, waving his arms. The car swerved violently, barely missing him. Lena's heart was in her throat. She could see Noah in the back seat, still pounding on the window, his sobs muffled by the closed door. She had seconds. Act now or lose him forever. Her eyes locked onto the license plate. TN 783 XYZ. She repeated it over and over in her head, burning it into her memory. "Call 911, she shouted at Barry. Barry fumbled for his phone as Lena kept running, her legs burning, her breath ragged. But it was useless. The car sped off, disappearing down the road. Lena skidded to a stop, her body shaking with rage and helplessness. She had failed. Noah was gone. Barry reached her side, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, we need the police. Now." Lena stared at the empty road, tears stinging her eyes. She had to get him back. She had no choice. Lena forced herself to breathe, her hands clenched into fists as Barry spoke urgently into the phone. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she focused on one thing, the license plate. TN 783 XYZ. Barry's voice was rushed, panicked. "Yes, a man just kidnapped a little boy from the Starlight Motel. He drove off in a sedan, Tennessee plate, TN 783 XYZ. The kid was screaming for help. Yes, he's about 5 years old. Please send someone now." Lena barely registered the dispatcher's response. Her mind was racing. Noah was gone. And she had no idea where that man was taking him. Barry hung up, his face grim. "Cops are on it," he said. "They're putting out an alert for the car." Lena nodded, trying to steady herself. "We have to do something." Barry ran a hand through his thinning hair, frustration clear on his face. "What do you want to do, Lena? Chase after them? We don't even know where he's going." Lena looked back at room 12. The mother. She might know. Barry followed her gaze. His lips pressed into a tight line. If she even cares. Lena didn't waste another second. She sprinted toward room 12 and pounded on the door. "Open up." Silence. Lena banged harder. "Your son was just taken." Still nothing. Barry stepped up beside her. Screw this. He grabbed his key ring and quickly found the master key. With one swift motion, he unlocked the door and pushed it open. The moment Lena stepped inside, she knew something was wrong. The air was thick with that sharp chemical stench again. The lights were off, the curtains drawn. And then she saw her. The mother was slumped on the bed, completely motionless. A used syringe lay on the nightstand. Lena's stomach turned. Oh, no. She rushed to the woman's side, shaking her gently. Hey! Wake up! The woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. Her lips parted, but no words came out, just a faint, incoherent mumble. Lena turned to Barry, panic rising in her chest. She's out of it. We need paramedics. Barry swore under his breath and pulled out his phone again. Yeah, it's me again. We need an ambulance too. Possible overdose. Room 12. Lena looked back at the woman. Noah's mother. The one person who should have been protecting him. Instead, she had let him go. Lena grabbed the woman's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was weak, but there. Hey, she said more firmly. Wake up. You need to wake up. The woman's eyes opened slightly, unfocused. Dale, she slurred. Lena stiffened. Who's Dale? The woman blinked slowly, her head lolling to the side. Took him, like we planned. Lena's breath caught in her throat. You planned this? The woman didn't respond. Barry's expression darkened. She sold him. Lena felt cold all over. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, but deep down, she knew it was true. The money. The whispering about not having enough. The way the man had taken Noah without hesitation. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a deal. And Noah had been the price. Lena shot to her feet, her whole body trembling with rage. We need to find that car now. Barry nodded, but before either of them could move, the distant wail of sirens reached their ears. Help was finally here. But was it already too late? Red and blue lights flashed against the motel's faded walls as two police cruisers screeched into the parking lot. Doors flew open, and officers poured out, moving with swift precision. Lena rushed toward them, her voice urgent. He took the boy. The car, it's a Tennessee plate, TN 783XYZ. One officer, a tall man with a sharp gaze, immediately keyed into his radio. Dispatch, we have an active child abduction, suspect vehicle TN 783XYZ. All units, be advised. Another officer, a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, turned to Lena. Tell me everything. Who took the child? Lena barely took a breath before launching into it. A man, he showed up this morning with Noah's mother. She let him take the boy. I think she sold him. The officer's expression hardened. Where's the mother now? Barry pointed to room 12. In there. Looks like an overdose. Two paramedics had already rushed inside. Moments later, they wheeled out Noah's mother on a stretcher. She was barely conscious, her head rolling weakly from side to side. As they passed, the officer leaned in. Krista Holloway, you are under arrest for child endangerment and suspected involvement in human trafficking. You'll be questioned at the hospital. The woman mumbled something incoherent, but her lack of response didn't matter. Lena turned back to the officer. Please, you have to find him. He was so scared. The officer nodded. We will. The suspect's plate is already being tracked. Lena could only hope it was enough. 15 agonizing minutes crawled by. Then, suddenly, a crackle came over the police radio. Suspect vehicle located. Highway 440, heading east. Officers in pursuit. Lena's breath caught. They found him. Barry exhaled sharply. Thank God. The officer holding the radio listened intently. All units, be advised, suspect is accelerating. attempting to evade. Lena's stomach twisted. No. No, don't let him get away. She gripped her arms, nails digging into her skin as she imagined Noah trapped in that car, terrified. The radio continued. Suspect swerving, approaching roadblock. Silence. Lena barely breathed. Then. Suspect crashed. Officers moving in. Lena's legs nearly gave out. Barry caught her arm. They got him. She didn't let go of the breath in her lungs until the next words came through. Child is safe. Repeat, child is safe. A sob of relief broke from Lena's throat. She pressed her hands to her face, tears stinging her eyes. Oh, thank God. Barry clapped her shoulder. You did it, Lena. But Lena shook her head. No. Noah did. He fought. And he survived. Nearly an hour later, another police cruiser pulled into the lot. Lena stood frozen as the door opened and a small figure climbed out, wrapped in a blanket. Noah! The moment he saw her, he ran. Lena dropped to her knees just in time for Noah to throw himself into her arms. You're okay, she whispered, holding him tight. You're safe now. Noah clung to her, his tiny body trembling. I was scared, he mumbled against her shoulder. I know, sweetheart. But you're safe now. A shadow fell over them. Lena looked up to see a man tall, disheveled, with frantic eyes. Noah, he choked out. Noah's head snapped up. Daddy? The man rushed forward, falling to his knees beside them. Buddy, oh, my God. Lena loosened her hold, watching as Noah hesitated for only a moment before launching into his father's arms. I missed you, Noah sobbed. I missed you too, buddy, the man whispered, holding him close. I've been looking for you. Lena swallowed the lump in her throat as she stepped back, giving them space. Michael Holloway clutched his son like he never wanted to let go. His tear-streaked face turned to Lena. You saved him. Lena shook her head. He saved himself. Michael's voice broke. Thank you. Thank you for not looking away. Lena felt a tightness in her chest. For years, she had watched people come and go from the Starlight Motel, carrying their secrets with them. She had learned not to ask questions. Not to get involved. But today, she had done something different. And because of that, Noah was going home. She gave Michael a small smile. Take care of him. Michael nodded, holding Noah even closer. Always. Lena watched as Noah buried his face in his father's shoulder, his small body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Michael Holloway clung to his son as if afraid to let go, his fingers gripping the back of Noah's shirt with desperation. The sight of them together, reunited after what must have been a nightmare for both of them, filled Lena with emotions she couldn't quite name. A lump rose in her throat as she took a step back, giving them space. Michael lifted his tear-streaked face, his eyes locking onto Lena's with an expression of pure gratitude. You saved him, he choked out. Lena shook her head. No, he saved himself. I just helped. Michael let out a shuddering breath, his arms tightening around Noah. I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't stopped that man, his voice cracked, unable to finish the thought. Lena felt her own breath hitch. I just did what anyone should do. Michael looked at her, his eyes dark with emotion. No. Most people would have looked away. You didn't. Lena held his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. For years, she had trained herself not to interfere, not to ask questions. The Starlight Motel was a place where people came to disappear, to hide, to escape. She had learned that prying into their business only brought trouble. But today had been different. Today, she had made a choice. Barry stood nearby, his usual sarcastic demeanor replaced with something softer. He cleared his throat, shuffling awkwardly before speaking. Kid's lucky you were here, Lena. Lena gave a small, tired smile. Maybe I was lucky too. The police officers moved around them, wrapping up the scene. One officer, the same woman who had taken Lena's statement earlier, approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Holloway, we'll need you to come down to the station to give an official statement. We've already confirmed that Noah is your son, but we still need to process some paperwork." Michael nodded, still holding Noah protectively. "Of course. Whatever you need." Noah clung to him, his small hands gripping his father's shirt. "I don't want to go anywhere else," he mumbled. Michael kissed the top of his son's head. "I know, buddy. We'll just answer some questions, and then we'll go home." Lena watched as Michael stood, adjusting Noah in his arms as if he would never let go again. The boy curled into his father's chest, exhausted but safe. Michael turned back to Lena one last time. "I owe you everything," he said quietly. When a mother and her young son abruptly left the motel in a strange hurry, with the boy barely dressed, something about their behavior felt terribly wrong to the maid. Trusting her instincts, she decided to check their room, and what she found hidden beneath the sheets made her blood run cold. In that moment, her worst suspicions were confirmed, and she had to act fast. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky in muted shades of pink and gold as Lena Morales made her way down the worn corridor of the Starlight Motel. At 38 years old, Lena had spent more mornings than she cared to count in this place, her hands wrapped around the handle of a mop, her eyes taking in the faded wallpaper and scuffed linoleum floor that had become as familiar to her as the lines on her own palms. The Starlight Motel stood as a tired sentinel on the outskirts of Orange Mound, Tennessee. Its L-shaped, two-story structure had seen better days, the once bright neon sign now flickering weakly in the pre-dawn gloom. Outside, a small playground sat in silent testimony to happier times, its swings and slide now rusted and forgotten, untouched by the laughter of children for years. Lena's movements were practiced, almost meditative, as she guided the mop across the floor. The quiet of the early morning was broken only by the soft swish of the mop and the occasional creak of the old building settling. As she neared the end of the corridor, a flicker of movement caught her eye through the smudged window. Pausing her work, Lena leaned the mop against the wall and moved closer to the glass. In the dim parking lot, she saw an old sedan pull in, its headlights cutting through the morning mist. As the engine cut off, two figures emerged, a woman and a young boy. The woman looked haggard, her movements jerky and uncertain as she retrieved a suitcase from the back seat. The boy, dressed in pajamas that seemed a size too small, clung to his mother's hand, his eyes heavy with sleep. Lena watched as he yawned widely, his free hand rubbing at his eyes in a gesture that tugged at her heart. Realizing they would need to check in, Lena abandoned her mop and made her way to the front desk. The ancient clock on the wall read 6:30 a.m., far too early for the regular receptionist to have arrived. It wasn't an unusual situation for Lena, though. Over the years, she had become accustomed to handling these early morning check-ins, a jack of all trades in this small, rundown establishment. As the woman and child entered the lobby, the harsh fluorescent lights cast deep shadows under their eyes, accentuating their exhaustion. Lena put on her best professional smile, though it felt strained even to her. "Good morning," she greeted them softly, mindful of the sleepy child. "How can I help you today?" The woman approached the desk, her eyes darting nervously around the shabby lobby. "We need a room," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just for the night." Lena nodded, her fingers moving efficiently over the ancient computer keyboard. "Of course. That'll be $30 for the night with a $20 deposit." She watched as the woman fumbled in her purse, eventually producing a crumpled handful of bills. As Lena counted out the money and prepared the room key, she couldn't help but notice the boy's drooping eyelids and the way he swayed slightly on his feet. The woman, too, looked like she was running on fumes, dark circles prominent under her eyes. "You'll be in room 12, Lena said, handing over the key. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room." The trio made their way down the corridor in silence, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Lena could feel the weariness radiating from both mother and child, and she kept her explanation of the room's features brief as she ushered them inside. "The phone is here if you need to reach the front desk, just dial 0, she explained, gesturing to the ancient rotary phone on the nightstand. Hot water is limited, so you might want to keep showers short. Checkout time is 11 a.m. tomorrow. The woman nodded absently, already moving to place the suitcase on the bed. Lena winced internally as she saw the luggage wheels leave a dark streak on the worn bedspread but said nothing. The boy had already climbed onto the bed with his shoes on, his head sinking into the pillow. "If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to ask," Lena said, but the woman seemed barely to register her words. Taking this as her cue to leave, Lena quietly exited the room, closing the door behind her. As she made her way back to the reception area, Lena's mind wandered. She wondered about the story behind this small family, what had brought them to the Starlight Motel at such an early hour. But such speculation was a dangerous game in a place like this, where many guests carried secrets they'd rather keep hidden. Reaching for her mop, Lena was about to resume her cleaning when a sudden realization hit her. In the rush to get the guests settled, she had forgotten to provide them with the TV remote and Wi-Fi information, both stored at the front desk, with the remote kept there specifically to prevent theft. Sighing at her own forgetfulness, Lena retrieved the items from the locked cabinet behind the desk. She made her way back to room 12, hoping she wouldn't be disturbing the exhausted pair too much. Knocking softly on the door, Lena waited. No response came. She knocked again, a little louder this time, and called out, "Housekeeping. I have some items for you." After a moment, the door opened a crack, and the woman's face appeared, her expression a mix of irritation and fatigue. "What?" she snapped. Taken aback by the harsh tone, Lena nevertheless maintained her professional demeanor. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, "but I forgot to give you the TV remote and Wi-Fi information earlier." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she reached out and snatched the items from Lena's hand. "Next time, leave them outside. Don't disturb us again," she growled, and with that, she slammed the door in Lena's face. Stunned by the sudden hostility, Lena stood frozen for a moment. She had encountered her fair share of rude guests over the years, but something about this interaction left her deeply unsettled. Shaking her head, Lena made her way back to her abandoned mop. However, as she resumed her cleaning duties, the encounter played over and over in her mind: the woman's agitation, the boy's exhaustion, the late-night arrival. All of it added up to a picture that didn't sit well with Lena. But what could she do? In a place like the Starlight Motel, in a neighborhood like Orange Mound, unusual circumstances were more the rule than the exception. The clock on the wall now showed 6:45 a.m. As the morning began to color the sky, Lena tried to push her concerns aside. She had rooms to clean and a long day ahead of her. But even as she focused on her tasks, a small part of her remained alert, listening for any sounds of distress from room 12. As she worked her way around to the other side of the L-shaped building, Lena's eyes drifted to the small playground outside. The rusted equipment stood as a sad reminder of happier times, when families would stay at the Starlight for summer vacations or weekend getaways. Now, it was mostly a haven for those down on their luck or looking for a place to hide. The swings swayed gently in the morning breeze, chains creaking softly as if mourning their own neglect. Lena made a mental note to mention the playground to the boy when she saw him next. Despite its dilapidated state, children often found joy in the simple act of swinging or sliding. It might bring a smile to his sleepy face. The quiet of the early morning was suddenly shattered by the sound of a door opening. Lena turned, startled, to see the woman and child from room 12 hurrying down the corridor toward the exit. The contrast from their arrival was stark and jarring. The woman looked even more haggard than before, her movements jerky and agitated, eyes darting nervously as if expecting pursuit. But it was the boy that truly caught Lena's attention, his transformation sending a chill down her spine. Gone were his pajamas, replaced by nothing more than a thin tank top and a diaper. His bare legs poked out beneath the oversized shirt, and his feet were completely bare against the rough carpet. The woman clutched the suitcase in one hand, practically dragging the child with the other. Alarm bells rang in Lena's head as she abandoned her mop and rushed to intercept them at the front desk. Lena's heart pounded as she struggled to keep her voice calm and professional. "Excuse me, "Is everything all right?" she asked, trying to catch the woman's eye. "Are you checking out already? I can process your refund if there's a problem with the room." The woman barely spared Lena a glance, her eyes wild and unfocused. She muttered a terse, "We're not leaving," as she pushed past, her grip on the boy's arm visibly tightening. Lena watched helplessly as they climbed into the sedan, the woman roughly depositing the boy in the back seat before tossing the suitcase into the trunk. As the car peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the worn asphalt, Lena stood frozen, a knot of unease growing in her stomach. The whole scene felt wrong, deeply and fundamentally wrong. The image of the boy in his inadequate clothing, the fear in his sleepy eyes, the mother's erratic behavior, it all pointed to something sinister. Lena had always longed for a child of her own, but life in Orange Mound hadn't presented her with many suitable partners. Seeing a child potentially in distress struck a chord deep within her, awakening a protective instinct she hadn't realized she possessed. Glancing at the clock, Lena saw it was now past 7:20 a.m. The day shift receptionist would be arriving soon, and she still had rooms to prepare. With a heavy sigh, she pushed her concerns aside and focused on her tasks. She moved from room to room, opening windows to air out the musty spaces. The questions multiplied in her mind as she worked. Why had the boy been dressed so inappropriately? Surely the woman had packed clothes for him, she'd brought a whole suitcase, after all. Had he wet himself? Was that why they left in such a hurry? But if so, why not simply ask for fresh linens? The more Lena thought about it, the more convinced she became that she needed to investigate. Using her housekeeping key, she cautiously approached room 12, her heart pounding in her chest as she unlocked the door. She pushed her cleaning cart ahead of her as a flimsy excuse for her intrusion. The moment she crossed the threshold, a peculiar odor assaulted her senses. It wasn't the acrid smell of urine she had half expected, but something sharper, almost chemical. It reminded her of burned plastic, though she couldn't quite place it. The scent hung heavy in the air, mingling with the stale odor of cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. Lena's unease grew as she surveyed the room. The bed was a tangled mess of sheets, pillows strewn haphazardly as if thrown aside in haste. Water droplets speckled the bathroom floor, a damp towel crumpled in the corner. As she began to straighten the bedding, something caught her eye. Tucked beneath the rumpled sheets were several items that made her blood run cold: a bent spoon, blackened on the bottom, a handful of syringes, and 2 passports. Her heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. Lena was no stranger to the signs of drug use. She'd seen it all too often in her years at the Starlight, but the presence of a child in this situation filled her with a mix of sorrow and anger. What kind of mother would expose her son to such danger? As she stood there, frozen in indecision, movement outside the window caught her attention. The old sedan had returned, pulling into the parking lot with a screech of tires. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she saw not just the woman and child emerge, but a man as well. His face was set in a hard scowl that matched the woman's agitated demeanor, his eyes darting suspiciously around the parking lot. Lena's mind raced. Was this the boy's father? If so, why hadn't he been with them earlier? And if not, who was he? The questions multiplied, each more unsettling than the last. She watched as the trio made their way toward the motel entrance, the boy sandwiched between the adults, his small shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself invisible. With trembling hands, Lena quickly finished straightening the room, careful not to disturb the damning evidence she'd discovered. She needed time to think, to decide what, if anything, she should do with this information. As she wheeled her cart out of the room, Lena's gaze lingered on the small boy trailing behind the adults. In that moment, she made a silent vow to keep a close eye on room 12, no matter what it might cost her. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Lena made her way back to the front desk, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The clock on the wall read 8 a.m., and right on cue, the day shift receptionist, Barry McKay, pedaled into view on his ancient bicycle. Barry, a lanky man in his mid-50s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, had been working at the Starlight almost as long as Lena. He nodded a greeting as he stowed his bike helmet in the small storage closet behind the desk and logged into the computer. "Morning, Lena," he said, stifling a yawn. "Anything exciting happen on the night shift?" Lena hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "Barry," she began cautiously, "did you see that old sedan in the parking lot? The one with the woman and the little boy?" Barry's brow furrowed as he recalled. "Yeah, I saw them. Kind of hard to miss. That kid was barely dressed. What's going on?" Lena quickly filled Barry in on the strange comings and goings of the guests in room 12, including the arrival of the unknown man. As she spoke, her concern grew. "Barry, I'm worried. Something doesn't feel right about this situation. Do you think we should call the police? Or maybe Child Protective Services?" Barry let out a long sigh, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Lena, honey, this is Orange Mound. You know as well as I do that the cops around here have bigger fish to fry. And CPS? They're so overworked, they barely bat an eye unless there's blood on the floor." Lena's shoulders sagged, knowing Barry was right. Orange Mound's history of poverty and crime meant that law enforcement often turned a blind eye to all but the most egregious offenses. A child in a tank top and diaper, while concerning, was hardly cause for alarm in a neighborhood where far worse occurred daily. Besides, Barry continued, the kid's with his parents, right? Or at least his mom? CPS isn't going to do much without clear evidence of abuse or neglect. We'd just be upsetting customers for nothing. Lena nodded reluctantly, Barry's pragmatic words dousing the fire of her concern. She had lived in Orange Mound long enough to know that good intentions often led nowhere in this part of town. Still, the image of the boy's fearful eyes haunted her. As if summoned by their conversation, the door to the motel office swung open. The woman from room 12 entered, followed closely by the man and the little boy. Lena and Barry exchanged a quick glance before plastering on their best customer service smiles. "Good morning," Lena called out, her voice overly cheerful. "I hope you found everything to your satisfaction." The woman barely grunted in response, her gaze fixed straight ahead as she marched toward their room. The man's cold eyes swept over Lena and Barry, a clear warning in their steely depths. But it was the boy who truly captured Lena's attention. Gone was the sleepy child from earlier that morning. In his place was a quiet, wary little figure who seemed to shrink into himself with each step. His eyes darted nervously between the adults, and Lena could have sworn she saw a flicker of fear cross his face as the man's hand came to rest heavily on his shoulder. As the trio vanished down the hallway, Lena turned to Barry, her earlier resolve wavering. "Maybe you're right," she murmured. "Maybe it's not our business. I guess the night shift just got to me." Barry nodded sympathetically. "Look, Lena, I know you mean well, but we can't save everyone who comes through those doors. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is just mind our own business and let folks sort out their own problems." Lena nodded, but deep down, she knew Barry was wrong. Something was terribly wrong with that little boy's situation. And she couldn't just look the other way. Lena was about to enter one of the empty rooms when a commotion from the corridor caught her attention. She scanned around, peering toward the source of the disturbance. The family from room 12 stood just outside their door, but the boy was struggling against his mother's grip, refusing to enter the room. His small face was contorted with fear and determination as he tried to wrench his hand free. Lena's heart clenched at the sight. She took an involuntary step forward, but Barry's hand suddenly landed on her shoulder, holding her back. He must have heard the commotion from the reception area too. They watched, torn between the instinct to intervene and the ingrained habit of minding their own business. Before they could decide, the man's gaze snapped toward them. His eyes were cold and threatening, boring into Lena with an intensity that made her shiver. He leaned in close to the woman, whispering something in her ear. She, too, turned to look at Lena and Barry, her expression a mixture of anger and weariness. Feeling caught, Lena and Barry approached the family, trying to appear casual. "Is everything all right here?" Barry asked, his voice carefully neutral. The mother's response was immediate and harsh. "Don't you have anything better to do than watch other people's business?" she snapped. "Nothing's happening. The kid just doesn't want to listen to his parents." The man, whom Lena assumed was the boy's father, spoke up in a composed and calm voice. "We'll leave him outside for a while. He'll come around. I think he just needs some playtime after the long journey." Lena, sensing an opportunity, quickly offered, "That's no problem at all. We have a small playground. I'd be happy to keep an eye on him for a while." The mother seemed to consider this for a moment before turning to the son. "You can stay outside, but you listen to this lady and be good. Understand?" The boy nodded silently, his eyes wide and wary. The mother and the man disappeared into the room, the door closing with a final sounding click. Lena crouched down to the boy's level, her voice gentle. "Would you like to see the playground? We have a swing." The boy remained quiet, shaking his head slightly. Lena, undeterred, continued softly, "That's okay. We could just sit for a while if you'd like. The swing is nice and quiet." After a moment's hesitation, the boy nodded, following Lena to the old playground. The rusted equipment creaked in the morning breeze as the boy settled onto the swing, his small hands gripping the chains tightly. Lena kept a watchful eye on him, her heart aching at the sadness etched on his young face. Slowly, carefully, she began to draw him out. "My name's Lena," she said softly. "What's yours?"